The BBC has been publicly and furiously excoriated by the heir to the throne and is being warned by ministers that they will intervene if it doesn't do enough to restore trust with the public. We did ask the BBC to appear on this programme, but they have chosen not to. So let's bring in Dorothy Byrne, former head of News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. Dorothy Byrne, you were one of the most senior executives in British TV journalism at Channel 4 for many years. And in fact, it was Channel 4's documentary last October that started questions being asked about this whole affair once again. How serious is this for the corporation, do you think, and can it recover?
I think it's extremely serious. What has been revealed is absolutely scandalous, and it is scandalous that for more than 25 years, the BBC has refused to fess up to what it did, when in fact, all other television journalists have known about the faking of these bank statements for more than a quarter of a century. It's also scandalous that Martin Bashir was employed just a few years ago, ironically, as head of religion. So it is extremely serious. And actually, we as other television journalists are outraged because it has led some people to smear the whole of our profession, when in fact television journalism overwhelmingly is very tightly regulated and not at all the way that tabloid journalism behaves. Since the events 26 years ago, the BBC has become regulated independently, and I think that is absolutely key. At the time, the BBC was permitted to regulate itself, which was clearly absolutely wrong. So I think it's very serious, but we shouldn't see this as an opportunity to attack all television journalism. However, I do think that the BBC, ITV, and US networks need to look at all the other stories which Martin Bashir did.
Many you think that we need to go back over Martin Bashir's record and check?
Sorry, say that again.
You're saying we need to go back over Martin Bashir's record through the BBC, he's worked for ITV, I think he may have worked for Channel 4, and a couple of the US networks, and we need to look at all he's done.
Yes, I do not believe Martin Bashir ever worked for Channel 4. I would never have employed Martin Bashir. I knew all about him. Many questions, well, I didn't know all about him, I knew some about him.
You knew enough about him to say that if he'd come to you for a job, you would have shown him the door?
He wouldn't even have got to the door. He's one of the most notorious journalists in Britain and has been for a quarter of a century. I mean, it would be almost funny that the BBC had employed him as head of religion if it wasn't so obscene. But other people who have been interviewed by Martin Bashir have complained that he lied to them. And we know that the BBC wrote a formal letter to ITV about Martin Bashir's conduct on several stories. So I think that both BBC and ITV need to look at all his scoops, because what Martin Bashir and some of those around him did was mistake getting a scoop at all costs for proper, decent, ethical journalism.
Dorothy, let me put this to you. You are pretty robust about Martin Bashir's record. Martin Bashir might say, if he were watching this, well, of course they'd say that. They didn't get the story, so of course they're going to try to bury me.
Martin Bashir can say that if he wants. I would rather not have a story than get a story by lying. Proper investigative journalism should never be confused with lying to get a scoop. A scoop is not the be-all and end-all of journalism. that's, if I may say, a terribly male attitude towards journalism. You know, journalism is about careful and forensic investigation of the type that we saw in the Panorama last week, which exposed Martin Bashir. I yes, one looked at that interview and thought it's amazing that he got that interview. But that's actually one of the problems with Martin Bashir. On several occasions, other journalists have thought, how on earth did he get that scoop? How on earth did he persuade that person to do that interview? And that is what we must now see investigated.
Dorothy, this story is really just in part about Martin Bashir. The bigger issue, I guess, is about the BBC. Do you think the time has come for the BBC to stop being able to mark its own homework?
Well, the BBC no longer marks its own homework in the way that it did more than 25 years ago. It's now properly regulated by Ofcom, and I think that Ofcom is a good regulator. And from all over the world, people come to the United Kingdom to look at our system of regulation because it is so good. And it's because it's so good that we have very high levels of trust in British television journalism. And particularly during this pandemic, we've seen Ofcom itself has revealed these figures, very high, even higher than usual levels of trust in television journalism. So we mustn't assume that the public doesn't trust journalists.
It is worth pointing out, though, that those very Ofcom figures that you're quoting put the BBC at the bottom of the trust league, 10 points behind Sky, 8 points behind your own Channel 4. Do you think that this system of regulation, though, has been shown to be, at best, inadequate? Do you give any credence to the proposals, for example, from Lord Grey, that there should be an editorial board of experienced journalists who can spot the signs of this kind of thing going on, which, you know, the BBC's Board of Governors, best will in the world, full of people who don't do journalism, would never be able to see?
At the time that this happened, the BBC was regulating itself. It is now, quite recently, moved to a new system where it is regulated in the same way that the rest of us are. The idea that yet another committee of so-called experienced blokes is going to make some difference, I don't give much credit to the idea that the problem with men is more men. I think that the regulator that we now have is good. I do think that one reason that the BBC has fallen just slightly in these tables of trust is the relentless attack on it in newspapers, which I think would affect people's attitudes towards it. But I've never worked for the BBC. I've never wanted to work for the BBC. I've always regarded it as an arrogant organisation of posh white blokes, and that's what we saw happen in that in this scandal. How those men covered the traces, but it is a very good organisation, and the journalists are good.
You will be familiar with the phrase that it's not the crime that really killed you, but it's the cover-up. And I wonder, your equivalent at the BBC, who later became Director General, Tony Hall, did what Dyson has described as a pretty weak and feeble investigation. What do you imagine was going through the minds of BBC management when they allowed this to happen? Do you think, having been at that level of responsibility, how do you think this actually took place?
I cannot see into the mind of that man. I think there is a great arrogance there, isn't there, in that institution, certainly at the time, that they thought they didn't need to be transparent. You know, there's a moment when you discover something bad has happened in your organization and you need to gird your loins and fess up to it. It's happened to me in my career that bad things have happened in the organization, and what you have to do is admit it. There's an arrogance about the fact that the BBC didn't admit it at the time, and I think that was partly the culture, and that there were too many similar types of people, overwhelmingly men, running that organization. And it shows me that we need greater diversity in the higher management of organizations in our country.
The BBC's got a new boss, Tim Davie, who was responsible for publishing this Dyson report. What would he need to do to satisfy you that the BBC has done enough to make sure that nothing like this, and I include the cover-up, by the way, could happen again?
For me, it's important that the BBC should also inquire into how Martin Bashir ever came to be the head of religion. And it's important to me that they should look at the other stories that he did at the BBC. And they should cooperate fully with Ofcom when they receive complaints. I think they do behave better now. Indeed, I recently made a complaint to Tim Davie myself about the BBC, and he responded.
Wow. Well, I bet he's pretty terrified after this. Thank you very much, Dorothy Byrne.
Thank you.